So I got back from a car show last night, put my car up on the four-post lift where it sleeps, and happened to turn around and notice there was some crud on the garage floor. Decided I better take a look, and there was goo dripping out of the grate on the pumpkin. Now, mind you, I've replaced the triple seals a couple years ago, but apparently they're no longer willing to seal. So we're going to remove them and do some other seals. There's been some great write-ups about doing this. Ace Master did the ultimate tome on how to do all this, so this is really a direct copy of what he did with assistance from many of the other advisors and stooges on Ferrari Chat. So this is basically a rehash just for people who like to see it in moving pictures. Now the first thing you got to do is get to your pumpkin. I gather some models you can do this without removing the muffler, others you have to remove the muffler. I just took everything off. Okay, so behold, the pumpkin has been exposed, and it's pretty easy to pop off. It's got a bunch of 13mm bolts, but the key thing is up on the right hand corner looking from the back, leave this bolt in. It will keep the starter in place. These other two bolts are also starter bolts, but they have to come out to get the pumpkin off. But if you leave this one in, the starter will stay in place, and it makes life a lot easier. So you do all the 13mm bolts, and you also have to do a 10mm one over here to disconnect the little fitting that hooks the brake or the clutch hydraulic line to the pumpkin. And once that's off, we will pull the pumpkin off. The pumpkin's actually pretty easy to get off once you get the bolts off. Crash. There's some nice little slots along here and one at the bottom where you can put a wrench or a screwdriver and just give it a little tweak, and usually it'll actually come off fairly easy. Getting it on is more of a challenge. Okay, so the pumpkin's off, and this is what we're left with. Basically the back of the transmission here. This is the shaft from the engine. If you pull it out, you will find those beautiful triple seals. So the output comes out of here, goes to the clutch, which would sit here, and then it feeds back into this shaft, which is the gearbox, and that's a neutral, so I can spin that myself. Here's the bearing of the throwout bearing, and that's the starter with the one bolt that you leave in, so you don't have to deal with that. And down here's the little hatch that you can open up to take a peek at your transmission. So my problem's with my triple seals, but as long as I'm in here, I'm going to change everything. So first thing I'm going to do is take off these two 8mm bolts to pull off the bearing here. So that's the little thing that keeps this thing from popping off completely, but now that it's gone, it pops off completely with a spray of brake fluid everywhere. So inside, you probably can't see, there is a seal here, and I believe another seal. Okay, there's a seal there and a seal there, and we're going to replace both of those just because it's apart. Next, I'm going to take a 13mm and take this plate off, and there should be some more little seals that we're going to replace. Some little O-rings. Stop it for a second while I do these. Okay, so the 4 13mm bolts are off, or nuts are off, and this whole thing slides off. And we have another seal, and we have 2 little O-rings. Sometimes the O-rings stay there, sometimes they come off on the back of this, so don't lose them. And then, last but not least, we're going to pull off the little cover down here and these are 13 also, to check and make sure our nut is straight. Okay, the 2 13mm nuts are off down here. And I'm going to use the tool that Ace Master suggested, which is something for prying door panels off. And let's see if we can get this thing to budge here. So this thing turns out to be more of a bear to get off than I expected. I actually ended up sharpening the teeth on my tool here, and what seemed to work best was putting it in the gap between the 2 panels up here and up here, and lightly hammering it on each side. The prying thing didn't do squat, but now it seems to have finally broken the seal, and now we can hopefully gently pry it off without marring surfaces or anything. Okay, now it's out. Okay, so the good news is it's pretty well staked, but I think I will smack it again just to make sure everything's okay. I mean, what you're looking for is the indentations, the metal to be really shoved into those grooves so it can't back off. Okay, so I'm just going to take my piece of chisel here, put it where it's already indented, and give it a couple smacks to make sure it's really in there. The bottom one actually looks pretty good. We will zoom in on it here. So you want the metal to be really pushed into those slots so it won't back off, because apparently if it does, you've got problems. Okay, so now that we know that our stake is done, we're going to replace the O-ring on our little plate here. So I'm going to use a hook and a plastic fork here to try and get the old ring out. So old one is out. I'll throw that on the floor so I don't confuse it. And here's our brand spanking new ring. And we'll pop it in the grooves and should be good to go. Just clean up the mating surfaces here to make sure everything's nice and happy. And we will pop her back in. Actually, I'm going to smear a little of the gear oil on my O-ring to facilitate it popping back in. Okay, so now we will bolt it back up, and that will stop the hemorrhage of gear oil for a little while. Okay, let me tighten that up there. Okay, tighten my bolts down. Now we will remove the two itty-bitty O-rings up here. Okay, toss those to the floor so we don't mix them up with the new ones. And just pop the new one in. Okay, so I have both my little teeny O-rings in, and now I've got this huge ring to replace the one going all the way around the opening here. So once again I will rely on my plastic fork to not mangle anything. Let's see if I can get this thing out. Okay. So, old one to the floor so I don't mix it up. Make sure the new one is nice and surgically clean. I'm actually going to wipe out the channel it goes in to make sure that's nice and surgically clean. We'll pop our new ring in. Okay, so those rings are done. Okay, so now we've got the seal in the back of the thing that was bolted up there, and for that I'm going to use my El Cheapo seal pulling tool. I'm going to try not to mar anything up, so I'm going to put some paper towel here and stick my hook in and see if I can pop this thing out. Okay, she's out. Okay, and I'm going to throw that on the floor. Now I'm going to get my new seal and get it started. And then I'm going to use my trusty C-clamp here and smush it in. So here's my $1 million seal press. Block of PVC, block of wood, seals up in there. I'm just going to crank down and it pushes my seal right down. There we are. Seal is installed and looks pretty good.